And if we can move through those topics, that would be great. If we only cover a couple of these topics, that is also very fine and very good. Yeah. Larry shared with you some of the history of my coaching background. My history began probably when many of you were not even born yet. And certainly it began before France started to play organized American football. Go back to 1970 when I found myself as a young coach at the University of Oregon, the Oregon Ducks. And by the way, the Ducks, Oregon plays Stanford this weekend. Big game. So from the University of Oregon, I went on to college coaching. And I coached at a 2-year college, which is in the States, it's called a junior college. And that's where I began my coaching career in terms of my profession. And I had the opportunity, good evening, I had the opportunity to coach the defensive backs as a very young coach. And I also coached the kicking game, and then we flipped over and I coached the quarterbacks. We only had 4 coaches back in those days of college football. So many of you coached, I'm sure, with just 4 coaches or less. And what we tried to do when we only had 4 coaches back in those days, in the 1970s, we would have coaches coach the offense for 1 hour and then bring the defensive players out later. And then everybody would, now 2 coaches would go over and coach the defense and 2 coaches would stay with the offense. And then we pushed the offense off the field so that they weren't on the field more than 2 hours. And then all 4 coaches went over and coached the defense for the last hour. That's how we tried to almost double our manpower. So we only had 4 coaches, but we were actually coaching as if we had 8. Now, sometimes you don't have that opportunity because you don't have all that time. You can't keep half your team in the locker room or on the side and then say, come on out an hour later. I understand that. But that's an idea for you. Just to, if you're sitting here saying, Coach, how do I work it? I only have 3 coaches that we work with, or 4 coaches. That was what we used to do many years ago in American football. But I traveled from a 2-year college to many 4-year colleges, and I coached at the college level for 30 years. 30 years. Then I had a chance to coach in the professional level as a professional coach for 12 years, actually 11 to 12 years. So I am not coaching this year. So I get a chance to travel around and visit with all the different coaches. This is my first opportunity to come into Europe and have a chance to meet with coaches. So it is, again, my privilege and my honor. But what I was lucky to learn as a young coach, way back when I first started at the University of Oregon, an older coach, a senior coach, took me aside and said, Terry, you must become famous and recognized as very knowledgeable in one phase of the game. You have to become known for one phase of the game. You have to be the expert. For example, if I aspired to be a receiver coach, he was trying to relate to me, Terry, you learn everything you can about being a receiver coach. And over years of time, you become more of an expert on that among your peers, among your fellow coaches. And so I understood that. And I always remembered that. Even though I became a defensive secondary coach for a while, then I became a special teams coach in college and a secondary coach. So I got a chance to coach on the defensive side. I happened to have played quarterback in college when I was an active player. So I took the road that took me opposite the position I knew. And it really laid a foundation for me to build upon. Eventually, one coach asked me to flip over and become the quarterback coach and the wide receiver coach. And I really welcomed that opportunity, even though my passion was to coach defensive backs. I loved those players. They would run through a wall for you, and they would just do anything for you as defensive backs. And if any of you played that position, you can relate to that, or if you've coached that position. But I became a quarterback coach at the midpoint of my college career, and that's where I've been ever since. As a quarterback coach, I was fortunate to be a head coach in college at 2 different colleges, Rutgers University in the East Coast, and we used to play Syracuse, and they beat the heck out of us for about 5 seasons. So, watch it. But so I then became a coach in the NFL, and that's why you see me in I guess a Kansas City Chief uniform or top. But I said to myself after I learned I wanted to become really knowledgeable and strong in some area of the game. And it just so happened that I was fortunate to become strong in the position of coaching quarterbacks. And that was my destination. And here I am tonight to share some of that information with you. But the other thing I became very famous for was that I decided that I had to have a signature. So my signature was the Big Hunk candy bar. The Big Hunk candy bar. You can only buy these candy bars in certain areas of the United States. I don't believe France sells these Big Hunk candy bars. So as a college coach, I became known as when one of my players scored a touchdown, or they made just a tremendous effort in a football game that I was coaching him in, then I awarded him at the end of the weekend or the next Monday, and I would issue Big Hunk candy bars. And the college kids, 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, they loved it. They couldn't wait to jump up and get their Big Hunk. And I thought, man, that's great. And it wasn't breaking the bank. It didn't cost me a lot of money. So I went from one college like Stanford University. I was fortunate to coach at Stanford. I went to Cal Berkeley and coached at Cal Berkeley. I became the head coach at Rutgers and the head coach at San Jose State. And so I bounced around quite a bit. I traveled. Sometimes I was kicked out the door, and sometimes I was welcome. But I always took these with me. And so my careers came to an end in college, and now I became an NFL coach. You know, the sophisticated level of NFL football, the best football played anywhere in the world, they claim. And I thought, oh, this will never work with those pro players. I cannot ever believe that a pro player who makes X number of dollars is going to listen to some college coach talk about a big hunk because he scored a touchdown. Well, I gave it a try, and I coached at the Chiefs, and then I went to the Bears, and then I went to the Dolphins, and then I went to the Rams. And those are my teams that I ended up coaching in. And each team, I would take my big hunk with me and hand them out. And I thought, man, this is going to be bad. I mean, they're going to take this and throw it on the ground. But the same reaction. Here are these multi-million-dollar players, and they couldn't wait till Monday to get their big hunks in their locker or in a meeting. And so that's kind of what I've become known for. So I'm traveling around, and this wide receiver from the Chiefs, who I'd coached 10 years ago, came running up to me at a dinner we were at, and he said, "Coach Shea, you never gave me a big hunk." And I thought, oh my, what an impact this had on those multi-million-dollar players. So I've obviously traveled with this. For example, why would I be wearing, if I've coached in all those different areas, Stanford, Rutgers, why would I wear a Kansas City Chief shirt tonight? Can anybody answer? If you just can shoot your hand up and answer that for me, please do. Who can answer that? Why would I wear that? Yes?
Because of their season.
Because of what?
Of their season.
What do you mean because of their season?
They win.
Oh.
They're winning.
Do you know what their record is?
8-0.
8-0. I'll tell you what, you win the prize. There you go. Make sure you warm that up in the microwave oven or it'll break your teeth. Yes, the Chiefs are having a good year. And I do live in Kansas City still. But I do not coach there. I don't have any affiliation with the new team or with the new coaching staff. But they are putting together a pretty exciting season, being 8-0. And you know how hard it is to win every game as coaches. I think I probably coached close to 42 to 43 years, and I was fortunate to be involved with 2 teams that went undefeated. That's 2 teams out of 42 years. I mean, you're lucky to maybe even get 1 team sometimes to go undefeated. It takes quite a bit of good fortune for that to happen. So tonight we're going to have a little fun. So be on your toes because I've still got a few more big humps in my satchel. And away we go. Okay, I'd like to start with an approach to coaching that I really believe in. And if you were one of my quarterbacks or one of my defensive backs, if I were the head coach, I would still make this presentation to that group of players. I've used this as a head coach in what I'm going to share with you. I've used it as an offensive coordinator in the NFL. I've used it with quarterbacks. It just so happens that the last team I coached for was the St. Louis Rams. And that was a few years ago. But this is something that I always talked about to the players on how they approach practice and how they handle themselves when they're in a practice setting. So I will share this with you. When they're on the practice field, how are they going to act? What are you going to demand from your players? If you don't demand your player to do it the right way in terms of technique or any kind of skill, then you're probably not going to get the right way done. You've got to be demanding as a coach. You've got to make sure your player knows exactly what you expect from him. Therefore, these are some of the 5 principles, there's only 5, that I'll share with you tonight. For example, listen with your eyes, give every coach your attention and respect. As a head football coach, I really wanted to make sure that the players understood that just don't listen to the head coach. You listen to that assistant coach who is coaching the kicking game, or you listen and you focus on that coach who's coaching the wide receivers. Anytime he gets up to speak, you be ready to focus in. And I used to always say, if you hear it and you see it, player, write it down. If you hear it from a coach, and then the coach goes to the board and draws it, then in your ability to get better as an individual player, you write it down. Now that's in a meeting setting. You can't write things down when you're on the practice field. But those are things that I really demanded, and you have to think about what's important for the position or the group of players that you coach. You have to be able to demand and then expect to get it back. Okay? It's the coach who kind of wavers and is kind of fuzzy on what he's asking the player to do. You'll probably get that kind of a performance. And you wonder why some coaches here in the country always win. You know, at the club level or the under 19 level. They always seem to be at the top. Well, they are probably demanding certain things from their players, and they get that in response. So always, as a player, listen with your eyes. Keep your eyes on the coach. You know, focus on the coach.